Okay, so my topic for today is the art of humanizing pull requests. I want to get started by asking you like one question. How many of you spend hours working on something, asked someone for feedback, and all that feedback was very hurtful? I mean, I want everyone's hands up because I'm sure we have all been through this. So that's why my topic for today is the art of humanizing pull requests. Okay. Okay, so my name is Ankita Kulkarni. I'm a solutions architect at Wrangle.io. Today, I'm going to show you ways on how you can be more empathetic and how code reviews are actually interpreted by your peers. So I work at Wrangle.io. Wrangle.io is a software consulting firm based out of Toronto. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So today's agenda is what is a pull request. We are going to go through what is a pull request, how to create a pull request, how to review a pull request, and how to also respond to feedback. So what is a pull request? So how many of you have actually created a pull request or know what that is? Oh, that's awesome. So I'm sure everyone's going to relate to this. So for those of you who don't know, pull requests are a way of initiating code reviews. Once a pull request is sent, interested parties are going to voice their opinions on what they think about your code. And that's why the humanizing aspect comes in play a lot. We discuss potential modifications to your code, and keep in mind that we are actually collaborating together to write really good code as a team. Not just it's your code, it's my code, it's our code. So there's a process that goes into before you actually create a pull request. So I'm going to show you some ways on how I like to approach things, and I feel like have been very successful wherever I've been on a team, and as a team we have like applied all together. So first thing is breaking down your feature. Before you start working on any feature, now this is a front-end example, but doesn't matter, right? This is like a very basic example, be it front-end, back-end, doesn't matter. You need to like make a mental or written note, essentially, on how you want to actually break down your PR. This doesn't just help your reviewer, but also helps you. Like, if I start working on this really big feature, and if I start planning on how I want to break it down, it really helps me plan out and get more frequent feedback as well. So this is how I would break down the specific feature in like several PRs. So PR number 1, add a text box and an add button on the page. Now you're like, are you kidding me? Like I'm going to just add a text box and a button on the page? But think about this. This is your first PR. This is where you will set up your file structure and everything, right? And we all know that when we actually start creating new files, start renaming files and stuff like that, like we actually see that a lot more changes than it actually exists. So this PR is like my base PR, my setup PR. I'll set up styling. I will talk to my coworkers on how I want to approach this problem and so on. My second PR would be clicking on add buttons adds the item to the list. Now we all know that we underestimate forms, right? Like forms, we start working on forms and then it gets way too complicated than it's needed. So I personally like to break it down by clicking on the add button adds the item to the list. And this itself would actually also make a call to the database. We'll set up the API request. If you have any sort of middleware, you would also set that up. And lastly, clicking on delete deletes item from the list. Now this is a very basic to-do list, but this sort of gives you an idea on like how you would like break down your actual feature or like story or whatever you want to call it. So try to scope your PR to a single issue while trying to break it down. And this is in line with the programmer's oath, right? I will make frequent small releases so that I do not impede the progress of others, by Robert C. Martin. Larger the request, longer it's going to take to get to approval. And you will all get reviewer blessings for doing so. #blessing. I mean, we are all on Twitter, right? I mean, I can take a blessing. Now imagine if your coworker blasted this really huge PR. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to review it just because I'm in the middle of something and this like really huge pull request comes in. I want to make sure that there are less bugs and I pay attention to it. So it's going to cause more delays. So one thing I like about GitHub specifically, that they have a way of adding comments. So now let's say you have created that pull request for to-do list or whatever. And what I like to do is if I'm doing something really different, something unique, I just add comments, right? Like I'm using this library called Lodash and I'm using this function for immutability reasons or whatever your reason is. If you did something different, add a comment to it so that your coworkers will be like, okay, I got it. Otherwise, they're going to add a comment. Did you really intend to do this? Or this is like some sort of a mistake? Or like, what were you thinking, right? To avoid that and to avoid the feedback loop itself, you can add a comment. And this is not just true for GitHub, though. Like, you could do the same in like any other tool that you're using, like be it like Bitbucket or any other tool as well. The other thing I would like to do is I would like to add screenshots or GIFs. Now, in this case, I was building a React Native application wherein I wanted to like set up the bottom tab navigation. Now, this is like the core piece of the app itself, and I've done a lot of work to like actually set up the bottom tab navigator. So I used a navigation library and so on. So in this case, for a story, like as a user, I would like to view every screen using the tab bar. I attached a GIF itself, and that GIF is literally walking the user through by clicking on like different tabs. And this really helps my reviewer, right? Because they're going to be like, oh, cool, this works. She's not just saying that it works, but it actually does. So that really helps, again, get to approval faster. Now, I do understand that sometimes like it's really hard, like to create a video out of all of this. So screenshot also works. As long as, let's say if you have a backend API, just take partially a screenshot of your response or something. That really helps, and we all like pictures, and we all like to see code working, and this is like a great example of that. There's a really good tool called getcap.com. It's literally like you basically select your screen, and you can take video. It would only take video for that part of the screen itself. I find that very useful, and that's how I did this video, created this video as well. So tests are documentation of your code. Now, I come from a test-driven development background, but also like whenever I'm writing any like core logic, I really like to add tests so that I assure myself that my code is working. Plus, I also, they're like documentation of your code itself, right? So they're there to test your logic, but they're also adding documentation for your team. Try adding a test. Let's say if there's something complex that you're doing, try adding a test just explaining the complex part of your code versus actually adding a comment. Every time you add a comment, ask yourself, like, code comments, right? Like, we all like to, I like to get sometimes lazy and like add a code comment, and I ask myself, can I convert this into a test? Because that's going to run as part of every build. And in future, something changes, the test is going to verify that, right? So your code should just make sense to everyone, not just you. And that's why it really helps that the tests are documentation. So while writing tests, ask yourself these questions. If it's so difficult to understand, and can I make this code even like is there any way that I can make this code like more clear to other people, right? And not just like to other developers, but also see like, can I rename this function to something else? If it's so hard to write a test, can I add some more, can I split this function into several parts? So these are some of the questions, right? Can I split this code into smaller functions so I can test in smaller functions, like pure functions kind of way? Should I rename this function to something more obvious? Sometimes it's like not clear what you're really doing, and you write this like gigantic like logic, and you're really proud of yourself. But then when you put up a PR, you're like, it's really hard to explain what I'm trying to do, but it was this unique case that I got into, and I don't know how to get out of it. And it's just like, then ask yourself, like, can I rename this function to make it more obvious? And I am very bad at naming things, so I use tests as actually a way to help me rename my functions itself. And also, how can I simplify my code further so that it's less complex? So these are some of the things like what you can do to actually help make your code more clear. But regardless of what you pick, you should write a test. Regardless of whatever you want, whatever you end up doing, just write a test so that it helps for documentation as well. Now, this is a sample PR. As a user, I would like to view every screen using the tab bar. Now, this is how I would like to create a PR. This is like a very sample template. So this was like a native app project. So I'm just giving a summary saying I use React navigation for it. It was very easy to get started. And like some of the things that I did over here, I linked the story. And this is like part of the GitHub template as well. Templates exist in like all sort of tools. So this is nothing specific to GitHub. So in terms of like templates, like I added a few checkboxes just because sometimes like we would all like to have continuous integration and our tests magically run as we push commits to the build itself. But we did not have CI/CD, like we did not have continuous integration, continuous delivery over here at all. So I added these checkboxes. And just sort of like, is necessary documentation added? Like, did I change something that I can like update the documentation or anything like that? And at the bottom is a screenshot. On the right-hand side, there are also like labels, which is like features, bugs, or anything like that. And this can totally depend on your team. Try to discuss with your team and come up with like labels that can really help you on like what exactly that you're looking for. And towards the right-hand side, also like assign it to any reviewers, depending on what your team wants as well. So yeah, this is just like a very basic example on like how we can create a pull request so that it makes our life really easy and helps us get organized more. Next thing, let's take a look at how to review a pull request. Be empathetic. Now, as a reviewer, it's extremely important to provide feedback in a very nice way, in a very courteous manner. You need to remember that you're reviewing your teammates' code that you actually like to, go have a beer with, or go for a walk, or just like chill with them. So you want to be like more empathetic towards them. Put yourself in their shoes and see what they're thinking, so you will have a better answer. What happens is oftentimes we are behind computers, and we are looking at code, and it's like we forget that it's actually our friend or our teammate that we're talking to. And as we all know, feelings can get hurt easily. They are human, they have feelings, and they get hurt very easily. It's very important and to be empathetic during your code review process itself. And it's like no matter what your level is either, right? Whether you're starting off as a junior dev, intermediate dev, senior dev, or anything else, like be in the teaching mindset as well. And don't be too serious. Like have some fun while doing this. Like don't make it like this builds the team culture, right? Like how code reviews are like a part of our daily process itself, and this really helps us to like grow a better team and grow a better team culture. So don't be like too serious about it. Have some fun. Make it challenging for your coworkers to think through different problems and help them learn as well. Familiarize yourself with the code. So, I get it that as a reviewer you can always ask questions, but spend some time before you actually make comments on the code itself. So like to understand like what the code is trying to do, try to think of different ways on how you think you can implement it so that you can understand where they are coming from as well. And always get in the habit of teaching. As I mentioned earlier, no matter what your level is, you can always ask questions and help them think. It doesn't matter like what your level is. We all have created bugs in the past. So it's like anyone can catch bugs, anyone can give feedback, and anyone can write code. And it's totally fine. Ask questions, make them think, and use a very friendly tone for that. And always provide just code suggestions. So rather than just telling them, like, just spend some more time on this code or something like that, which I did get at one point, like spend some more time. I was like, what is that supposed to mean, right? So it's like, if there is a way you can provide code suggestion, please do so. Like, provide a suggestion on how you think you can make the code better itself. And if you can provide some examples, any links, or even like throw in a code sandbox link or any other like tool, like online tools, we have a lot of them right now, and just show them like what exactly you were thinking. right? And it's always better to reproduce the problem in an isolated way than do it in the environment like all fixated on it. So how can you reword feedback that will really help? Now, instead of saying this will crash when it's null, so you should null check this. This is totally fine, right? It depends on like the rapport you have with your team member. This is like totally cool. But you could also ask, what will happen if this value is null? What are some cases where this value might be null? And you might immediately think like, oh yeah, like I did not think that this value could be null. Can this be null? Will this lead to a null pointer exception or anything like that, right? So like this is like a very basic example on how you can make them think without just giving them what exactly needs to be done. And as developers, like when we are writing code, we like the challenge of thinking. We don't want anyone to come and tell us what to do. We we really like if people ask us questions and make us think. And that's what like really triggers us, and that's why we love programming so much. And use emojis. I am a very big fan of them. Online criticism is misinterpreted very easily. So emojis are like one of the best tools for communicating online. Using them like automatically adds a friendlier tone to your conversation. So if you're, let's say the conversation is getting too serious, right? Throw in an emoji and like make it like sound like a little bit lighter. And as you know, like even when you're getting like a very heated conversation, if your coworker throws in a smile emoji right there, you'll be like, oh, like they're not that serious. Maybe I was like too fixated on the problem. Having said that, don't like if that's not you, if emojis are not your thing, don't force it. Keep it real. Like you do you. Like you don't have to pretend to be someone else. That's totally fine. Take it offline. So if you find yourself going back and forth in conversations and it's not leading anywhere, right? And if you have the luxury, like you are literally a few desks away from your coworker, just walk over there and like have a quick conversation. There's no point like going and like just typing and like going back and forth when you can just walk to their desk and like have the same conversation itself. In fact, when you meet face to face, it adds, like you become more empathetic, and it humanizes the whole process. You develop more empathy towards them and they towards you as well. And when you do come to a conclusion on whatever discussion you were having, just, like add a comment to your PR itself that this is what we discussed, this is what we came up with, and your future self is really going to thank you for it, because we all know that after a couple of weeks, we are all going to forget what we just discussed about, because we have already moved on to the next problem. What I really like is nitpicks. Has anyone used nitpicks before at all? Cool. So while reviewing code, you might find something that's basically a nitpick. Like nitpicks are not important, but they're technically correct. So these are like a couple of examples, right? Like extra white space. Now that's like your linter should have caught that in the first place, but it happens, right? And the second example is, can we assign this value to a constant for better readability purposes itself? Now in this case, you can just prefix it with nit, and just it's not going to block the approval of your PR, but something you would want your coworkers to be in mind, like they can basically make the code better, right? And if you all are being nitpicky about the same thing, make it a TS or an ES lint rule, whatever you're using, right? That means all your team members think alike, and this is something that comes up every now and then in PRs. So why not make it a rule so that you avoid those code comments? And don't litter code with nitpicks. So you don't want to be that person who's just like nitpicky about each and every small thing. And if that's the case, which is sometimes happens at the beginning of the project, where you are new to the team and like you want to start it right, and this is your only chance or whatever. But at the same time, like at that point, set up these rules initially so that you don't come across as the nitpicky person, or have a team discussion in your team meeting or whatever, because that really helps. But don't just litter code with like nitpicks all over, because there's not just one way of writing code, right? There are several ways, and one way could be better than the other, but that's when you need to collaborate and work together. Lastly, so we went through how to create a PR, how to review one. So now let's talk about how we can respond to feedback very gracefully. Now you have put up a PR and you've got some feedback. If you think the feedback is valid, just implement it. Now, this is, I would say, the number one rule that really helped me grow. Just because whenever I saw that someone suggested a change, no matter how big or small it is, I would really go ahead and implement it. Just because I was like, this is my opportunity to learn and grow, right? So if you don't ask, also like if you don't understand something based on what they're asking, just ask for clarification and go back and forth and ask them questions on like what they're thinking. So like some examples of that is, I wasn't aware of this API that is very useful. Now, if you receive some feedback on your API, this is something that you can say, like you weren't aware of this function or API or whatever. This is an elegant solution. I never would have thought of that, right? Like if something you like, it really amazes you or something. Now don't follow this exact template. It's just like an example to like help you through like how you can make it really nice. Also get the point across. This is an excellent point. Change coming right away. So this is like if there's something that you found that is like valid, like you can say something like this. And sometimes it happens that you have this like really giant function, but if you like break it up, it would really help. And that's maybe what you were thinking too. But if your coworker suggests something, you can respond by saying like breaking up this function was a great idea, so much simpler now, and add a test for that, right? Because that really helps. Now, if you disagree, disagreements are bound to happen when different people are collaborating and working with each other, as there are different ways of writing code. Try to voice your opinion in a very friendly manner, right? Like you don't have to be rude about it. You can ask them. If you agree to them partially, let them know. And it's totally fine if you completely disagree with them. Ask questions, go back and forth and see. Don't take it too personally. And even when you're reviewing one, don't take it too personally there either, right? So you can ask them like what exactly the disagreement is about and how you can make it better. Make your commit messages obvious. So like I like in the to-do list example that we initially saw itself, like I broke down that to-do list in like several PRs. Now, whenever, let's say I'm making any changes, I like to make my commit messages really obvious, not just for my reviewer, but for myself and based on what I'm doing, so I can keep track of all the code comments that's coming to me. So writing a good message, commit message, would really go a long way. And there's a tool for this called Gitmoji. Because I like emojis, as you all know already, and there's this tool called Gitmoji that really helps in identifying the purpose or the intention of the commit just by looking at this emoji. So let's take a look at it. So Sparkles is introducing a new feature. Bug is like literally fixing a bug. Adding tests, if it's PR comments related, like showing an OK hand, and writing docs, right? Now, if you look at it, like anytime, these are like very common things that we keep doing when someone gives us any feedback or whatever, right? And let's say if it's like PR comments related, just mention what the comment was. If you can describe it, it's better. Now, let's say your code is merged in and a defect gets filed. How many of you have created bugs after you merged in your changes? I want everyone's hands up right now. Like, this is crazy. We have all caused bugs. Like, this is very obvious. So, a defect gets filed. Now, once you do fix that defect, add a test. Now, I get it. Like, bugs are bound to happen. There are certain situations that we didn't think of, and that's totally cool. But as you do fix that specific scenario, add a test supporting that specific scenario. Because there's proof, there's documentation that you actually fix that defect. So in future, if someone does come back to you and say, why is this problem still happening, you can always show that test. Or that's a sign that you need to write a better test too, because there's some other scenario that has come out of it. And for doing that, you'll also get brownie points, because as you went a step further for not just fixing the code, but also adding a test for it. And this also helps gain the trust of your peers, right? because this shows that you just don't want to like fix code, but you also want to help maintain it and scale it, because this will really help in making like a bug-free code. So story time. And I want to like talk about like this one specific story that I personally face. When I was working on one specific project, there was we were working with someone, and they literally went and like in a cave. They came out and they literally created this huge tool and blasted this really massive PR. And the problem with that was like we all appreciated their hard work. Like it's awesome that they actually want to improve the team culture and like help like with everything. But what happens with that is if you change 300 files or something, it's going to be really, really hard for anyone to review code for that matter, right? So all my team members were assigned for PR reviews because obviously 300 files have changed. We all need to make sure that we spend time on it. Each one of us actually ended up spending like 3 hours on this, just reviewing their code. And after spending 3 hours, we still couldn't get it. We still couldn't understand what they were doing. And I hate to say this, but most of us just ended up approving it, right? Because we don't want their effort to go waste. And it was also like the power dynamic situation wherein we couldn't like literally go back and forth with them. But at the same time, it's like it really is, it's a really bad situation. Now this is like the worst situation that I have faced as well. But at the same time, it's like this is like a very small, like big example, but in a very small way, like you can see how if they would have approached us in a very friendly manner, and like maybe even if they did build the tool, split it up into like smaller PRs, assign it to different people, we would not actually end up spending so much time on this, right? We would have lots more time in actually focusing on our work, because this literally distracted us. We went back and forth, and it was really hard for even them to like make sure that they're like whatever code comments that they got, they're actually making sure that they're following it. And it's not good at all, and you don't want to be that person who does that, right? One thing that they could have done is also like added some tests as well to make sure that the code is working, and even like set up a meeting to like go through the entire PR as well. But even doing all that, we all have individually like spent 3 or 4 hours when we could easily could have worked on some other feature. So this is just an example on how it's so important to humanize this process, how it's so important to communicate, and this is what builds your team culture. And the thing is, small things can have a really big impact. Now, as we saw, like whatever things that, like obviously there are more things that we could all add to our team culture, like to our team process to make this process a lot better. But these small things are actually the ones that actually end up having like a really big impact, because this is what sets the team culture. This is what helps like you look forward to every morning when you're coming into work. Because imagine like if everyone's like rude to you at work, even though how much how much ever like you'll really love your job, you are end up going to leave that place because you are not in a very friendly environment where you can ask questions, or you can grow, or you can help grow, right? And that's why it's really important that we think of the code review process in a very different way and start humanizing it. And I understand that sometimes in teams it's really hard to like make all these changes all together, right? But start making small changes. In every team meeting, maybe like include one change that you think you can improve, and go on from there and iterate on the basis of that. Now, for example, nitpicks are a very good example. If your entire team is being nitpicky about the same thing, just make it a TS-lint rule and talk about it in a team meeting itself. Now, having said that, I hope that was useful. Thank you so much. That's the only Spanish word I know.